we are good to go.
Welcome to the Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for March 22nd, 2023. I am now calling the meeting to order. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Could we have a roll call, please?
Jeff Jar,
Here.
Jackson Paul, Medina Atchison,
Here.
Bernie Grant,
Here.
Sherry Budd,
Here.
Brian Cullen.
Here. We have an agenda presented before us. Could we have a motion to accept the agenda? Or is there any additions or alterations to it?
Would like to make some additions or revisions to the agenda. There are a couple of revisions to the agenda that was previously posted last Wednesday, which was distributed to the planning commissioners, but just for the audience to know, there was a minor, a couple of adjustments on the agenda. One was a revision of the case number for the TNT fireworks case. One was a clarification that the previously scheduled public hearing is canceled for the rezoning at 16355 Haggerty Road. The language on the agenda has changed slightly to reflect that the applicant has temporarily suspended their request for rezoning. They haven't canceled it outright, but the public hearing is canceled. And then additionally, there's one other new correction, which is that the minutes that you are being asked to review tonight are those of March 8th, not February 22nd. So I would ask for a new revision to reflect the March 8th minutes, not the February 22nd minutes.
Do we have a motion to accept the agenda or the agenda as amended?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the updated agenda.
Motion by Commissioner Jar. Do we have a second?
Support.
Support by Commissioner Grant. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We have the minutes presented before us. Do we have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion by Commissioner Jar, second by Commissioner Budd to approve the minutes as presented. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moves us on. Any correspondence? I don't see anything. Public hearing. Do I go ahead and announce through the public hearing, or is that?
You can go ahead and just recite what's on the agenda for that, just to clarify again for the audience.
We had a public hearing, item 1, case 22-058, a request by the owner, Cameron Smith, to rezone 16355 Haggerty Road, described as parcel ID V-125-83-124-99-0001-000 from R1B Single Family Residential District to AG Agricultural and Estates. The parcel is located on the east side of Haggerty Road between Riggs and Savage. The owner has requested that this be temporarily suspended, and the public hearing has been canceled. Okay, brings us to old business. Nothing to report there. New business. Item 1, case 23-008, Chips All Gone at Belleville Square, temporary land use. The applicant, Peter Burgard, is requesting a temporary land use permit to conduct a temporary windshield glass repair land use located at 10972 Belleville Road. Parcel ID number 8306499003707. This site is located in the Belleville Square Shopping Plaza parking lot on the west side of Belleville Road between North Interstate Service Drive and Westlake Circle. This activity is proposed from March 2023 to November 2023. We first will have a presentation from Township staff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. To just have a visual on the screen of the location of the site and a depiction of the tent that is proposed to be used as part of this request. But I'll go ahead and start reciting my report as that comes up on the screen. As mentioned, the applicant, his name is Peter Brigard, has applied seeking a temporary land use permit for a tent service use involving minor automotive glass repair at the Belleville Square Shopping Plaza. The official address associated with that parcel is 10972 Belleville Road. The applicant has stated that it is 10900 Belleville Road. Both of those addresses cover this range of addresses on that site because it's a multi-address shopping center. The applicant has requested this use to occur from March 1st, 2023, or effective immediately following Planning Commission approval through November 30th from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Per the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance, temporary land uses that operate for more than 7 consecutive days require Planning Commission approval, and that's why you have 3 temporary land use cases before you tonight. Each of these requests will involve a use that exceeds 7 consecutive days. The proposed business that is associated with this request is titled Chips All Gone. The proposed use involves using adhesives to complete minor glass repairs to chipped windshields, and the use is based out of a tent in an existing parking lot. Township staff and the planning consultant have reviewed the use and considered it to be most closely aligned with the vehicle service minor category in the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance. I've provided a definition of that use in your staff report. Because the use is described as having minor application of adhesives and does not involve identified categories of what would be considered major automotive repair, it would not be a major automotive repair use. And of course, it is a temporary use in nature. Minor vehicle service is a special land use in the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance. And under section 7.120B4 of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinances, the applicant is eligible to apply for temporary land uses and activities intended for more than 7 consecutive days or 2 consecutive weekends, which are not otherwise mentioned in a exclusive list that appears in the zoning ordinance. As such, this use falls into that more open-ended category of a temporary land use that you may consider on a site like this. To assist in the review of this request, the applicant has provided a number of supplemental materials, including an image of the proposed tent, a site plan or map showing the location, and some narrative materials that describe the nature of the repair that occurs and some of the environmental letter that addresses some of the environmental concerns regarding the adhesive. And there's also a few comments on just some spec drawings on the material itself. The comments in my report will address the requirements of section 7.120C of the zoning ordinance, which address the criteria necessary for granting a temporary land use approval. The first is the adequacy of parking and access on the site. The site currently has roughly 400 public parking spaces, and the proposed setup area and tent appear to occupy roughly 16 to 18 spaces, so parking should not be a concern. The site also has adequate drainage to accommodate the parking lot, and this use would not increase impervious surface on the site, so there should be adequate drainage to handle stormwater on the site. The third criterion is compatibility with surrounding land uses. This proposed use is a vehicle service use in a parking lot that's otherwise an existing shopping plaza. While vehicle service does not quite align with retail, recreation, and service uses that generally occupy this site, it also does not necessarily interrupt the circulation or have a negative external impact, subject to your review and findings on this case. The use's impact on surrounding land uses is a more specific concern regarding the duration of the use. So one of the things that staff looks at closely with this criterion is the impact on the broader surrounding land uses and businesses in the township. Staff has some comments for consideration regarding this use and its presence and duration on the site compared to other vehicle service uses or similar businesses that may invest in a long-term brick and mortar site. So I'll speak to that a little bit more later in my report, but those are just things to consider regarding the impact on some surrounding land uses. I will say that there is a small amount of this adhesive or resin that is used in the daily operation, which I think the applicant has brought a sample of the capsule that's used to apply the resin. I will just, with this point, mention that if approved, this use shall involve full containment and daily disposal of excess resin so that it does not negatively impact the site. The fourth criterion is whether the size, height, and type of construction of the proposed buildings and structures in relation to the surrounding site are appropriate. The tent and portable storage container are temporary in nature, and tent sales regularly take place in parking lots. So there are no impacts anticipated to the surrounding sites. If approved, the temporary tent must be inspected by the Van Buren Township Building Department and building official regarding wind load and security. The use is adequately set back from rights-of-way and lot lines, and I have some comments on the setbacks in my report. The applicant was asked to provide information as to whether any electrical power or utilities were required. He has clarified to me that there is no generator or electrical power that will be required for the use. The applicant has indicated that one 10-gallon trash can will be on site. With regard to sanitary facilities, due to the short nature of the use, there will be no sanitary facilities provided. The applicant does have a signed agreement with the property owner for the property usage. As previously mentioned, the hours of operation are proposed to be 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days per week. The applicant has indicated that there will be no additional lights on site. As we go through these criteria, I'll mention regarding licenses and permits that a peddler's license has been obtained from the Van Buren Township Public Safety Department. If the temporary land use approval is granted, the peddler's license must match the approved duration of use as the temporary land use permit is for. The applicant shall also submit any available liability insurance policy that covers the use on the site. And as of today, the applicant has provided a copy of his liability insurance. The 12th criterion is regarding potential noise, odor, dust, and glare. The proposed temporary use should not increase the noise, dust, or glare from their use. This use involving some adhesive and resin that is used to secure the glass. Odor was a concern of staff, so the applicant should clarify whether there's any cause for concern with any of the odors generated. Regarding fire lanes, fire protection, and security, the proposed use is not anticipated to block any fire lanes. You do now have a report from the fire marshal and deputy fire chief that's included in the amended submittals for your packet tonight. Regarding off-site impacts or traffic volumes, the roads in the immediate vicinity are major township roads, and the temporary use will not impact the flow or travel volumes. The property owner will be responsible for ensuring the site is returned to its pre-sale condition. So staff has not identified that a bond would be necessary at this time. And then the last criterion that we review as part of temporary land use applications is whether there are other concerns which may impact the public health, safety, or general welfare. As previously mentioned, there is some concern that staff has had about the potential impact of a use that occupies a long-term presence on a site. There's a concern for consideration by the Planning Commission on the impact of use that may be approved for an extended period of time whether that takes the place of what would be otherwise a more permanent land use that undergoes site plan review and adheres to all of the zoning ordinance requirements that the township holds in terms of landscaping and site design and other features. There is some concern of the precedent that could set for other potential businesses operating in the township. For these reasons, I strongly recommend that the use is limited by the Planning Commission under the authority granted to the Planning Commission per section 7.120F7 of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance that allows you to set time limits. In my report, I recommend that the use is limited to no more than 6 months. I understand the applicant is going to make some statements about the proposed duration, and you saw that the original application had, again, March through November 30th. I would recommend a more limited duration than that, and I'd offer the Planning Commission to have some discussion on that. But my overall recommendation is that if the Van Buren Township Planning Commission finds that the proposed use meets the criteria of section 7.120C of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance, I recommend that the proposed use may be granted conditional approval on the conditions that I've previously stated, including that the use shall involve full containment and daily disposal of excess resin, that the temporary tent must be inspected by the Van Buren Township Building Department, that the applicant shall indicate whether a generator or any electrical power will be required, which he has indicated it will not, that if any peddler's license is obtained, that it must match the approved duration of the temporary land use permit, that the liability insurance policy shall be filed with the township, that the applicant shall clarify if the resin causes any odors or other concerns, and shall clarify any means used to mitigate odor. Conditions as stated in the Van Buren Township Fire Marshal and Deputy Fire Chief's report must be addressed, that the use is limited to no more than 6 months under the authority granted to the Van Buren Township Planning Commission, and that if there is any temporary sign, it must meet the requirements in Article 11 of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance. I would encourage you to hear from the applicant who's here tonight, and also I do apologize, I will try one other control to get an image up on the screen so you can see the tent. But otherwise, I'd invite you to turn this over to the applicant.
And do we have the applicant?
So that might actually work well because we have a overhead you can show that on. That works.
Hi, my name is Pete Burgard. Chips All Gone. We've been doing it over 13 years, and I really appreciate your time. Been working on it with Dan for.
Could you talk into the microphone for us, please?
Hi, Peter Burgard with Chips All Gone. Thank you. I really appreciate your time and your effort working with this. We're excited. We've been doing it over 13 years, and we're excited because every day is fun. Every time we do it, it's win-win. And I've been to a few of your meetings, and you guys really care about the community, and that's exciting for us because no customers can treat us better. No, I mean, it's just, has anyone ever got their chip fixed, or does anyone know what a chip fix is on a windshield? Does everybody know what we're talking about? When the rock hits your windshield, it makes that little tiny chip. If it cracks all the way across your windshield, you probably need a new windshield. But if it makes that chip, it might stay for 10 minutes or 10 years. and it could break. And then sometimes it costs $350 to $1,100, more like in the $395 to $750 range. And especially now with new cars, with all the calibration and the computers needed for all the rear view windows kind of things. So anyway, it's gotten more and more exciting. The win-win is you get your chip fixed in about 5 to 15 minutes, and it's guaranteed never to break. And that way, the customer doesn't have to shell out $450 sometime. Does that make sense? The things that you guys brought up about the resin and the smell, yeah, the resin has an odor, but we're outdoors, so it's never come up. I got samples of the resin and the materials. We don't, I mean, this is the only thing that we produce is a little piece of plastic after it's all done. So I'll pass these up to you guys, can look at them. And then we use a little piece of plastic to put the drip of glue on to seal it. And so we reuse these multiple times. And so the little piece of resin plastic, it turns into garbage and we throw these away. So, let's see. So the landlord, Mark Cavasar, is on Zoom and would like to speak also. To address some of the most recent concerns was like our insurance, we have over $1 million of coverage. In 13, 14 years, we've never had any claim. I mean, the only thing that can happen is someone's windshield breaks and we take care of them on the spot. What else? The resin bottles, yeah, it's glue. Yeah, my hands stink. I got to wash them. But that's about all it is. Or the worst thing that can happen is I put it in my eye and you just got to wash it out. Let's see, what else? The duration of the time, Dan said 6 months. That's great. It's summertime. It's great weather outside. We're fine with all that. Putting disposable of the stuff away. Mark, the landlord, said that we have a spot to store our stuff. So every night on the in his mall. What else? Yeah, the odor is not a problem at all. We're outdoors. And we have the insurance, no electricity, no generator. The tent is open flowing. Obviously, the building, if they need, the building inspectors need to look at the tent. If the fire marshal needs to look at the tent, we show all that before we open. We get all the permits before we open. We've done this before. I don't know. It's just amazing. I mean, I like how thorough you guys are. It's really, really good. It's to me, it's a no-brainer. It's just so win-win. But if Mark Canvasser would like to talk, I don't know if you're able to.
Through the chair, is it okay if I see if the landowner is available? I'll see if he's here. Yep, I do see a hand raised there, so we'll try to get Mr. Canvasser able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I'll make sure you're nice and amplified.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I first of all appreciate that you're allowing me to appear by video. I'm all the way on the east side of town, and it's impossible for me to get through with the traffic. As you know, we are the owner-developer of Belleville Square. We've been a good citizen of Van Buren Township since the early 80s. We also developed the Walgreens, the Menards, the Myers, and all of the outlots in front of the Menards and Walgreens. I've been working with Peter on, for a number of months on this particular site, and we have him in over 6 other locations. He's a stand-up guy, a good operator. As you know, we typically don't allow short-term rentals in our parking lot. That's why you haven't ever gotten a firework tent from us, or they go into Walmart, or the food trucks that go into the Menards. But we felt that this is a good use. It is complementary to our shopping center. And, you know, chips usually on a windshield can't be fixed unless they're under the size of a quarter. So it's a quick fix. It's a good use for us. As I said, we have Peter in a number of our locations. He's a great operator, and I hope you'll approve his use. We have, for the first time in probably a dozen years, a few vacancies at Belleville Square. The market is feeling a little soft. There's a lot of things going on in our economy, as you're well aware, and we just want to generate some more traffic in our shopping center. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions either on our projects in Van Buren or anything in our shopping center. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else?
I did see that there is a windshield repair shop in Ann Arbor. They're located in Arborland Mall for the last 5 years. Similar setup that we have.
Okay. Is there any questions or comments from the planning commission members?
Through the chair, I have a question for Director Powers. And then I could follow up with a question to the owner, and maybe I'll start with him. The owner did make a comment that they typically don't allow that type of use in their parking lots. Can he explain why they don't do that?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, because they're a lot of work. You know, the fireworks, quite frankly, they're dangerous, obviously, if a firework, and that's usually the type of requests that we have gotten were from fireworks. I just don't feel safe having fireworks. Peter, really, there's no need for any electricity. As I mentioned, you know, I've heard a number of comments about the resin. A chip is less than a quarter. It really doesn't generate any trash. But really, I don't want food trucks in my shopping center because of they need power usage. They obviously generate more trash. Peter doesn't generate trash. He doesn't really generate a whole lot of traffic. It's not a dangerous product. It's not a fireworks tent. So that's really why we have not allowed it.
And my follow-up to Director Powers is relative to the description of the vehicle service minor. Where this is being classified, it basically says minor repair or servicing of such vehicles is what we're basing this on. So would windshield wiper replacements be considered minor repair? Would replacing batteries be considered minor repair? Would headlights be considered minor repair? My concern is, are we going to end up with multiple requests for tents in other areas following this? I'm more concerned about the precedent that it sets more so than, how this use affects the lot, so.
Those are fair questions. I'd probably classify all those things as minor repair, some of which are fly under the radar. Oh, yep. I would probably classify all those things as minor repair, some of which often fly under the radar and can be done at home, but still it's probably under the same category of minor vehicle service or minor repair.
So this would set a precedent for maybe other people doing it, and as long as the owners of the centers would allow it to occur or apply for that, right?
It could, and I think that's a good discussion point for the Planning Commission. There may be some unique characteristics of this particular activity. It's maybe a little bit more specialized, having adhesive work performed for glass repair than maybe some of the other activities, but it certainly is a good discussion point.
I'd like to, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to add to what Director Powers said, just as a discussion point for the Planning Commission. A use like this would definitely be precedent-setting because you are going to have to look at minor vehicle repair in its entirety. So if you're looking at this use as possible, you've got to project and see that every other minor vehicle repair can also be done similarly, should be treated the same way. Which brings up the question why this use was classified as a special land use in our zoning ordinance in the first place. Special land uses are uses, they're specifically called special land uses because they are uses that are designed to have impacts on the adjacent properties, property values, so on and so forth. And there are standards in the ordinance that require additional design guidelines in order to mitigate those negative impacts. That's the whole reason for calling them special land use versus a principal permitted use. So that's another point the Planning Commission will have to discuss. The applicant might run an excellent operation and might be perfectly, clean, minimal generation, but then again, it opens up the interpretation for minor vehicle repair. If a battery replacement person comes and says, you make your hands messy, we'll do it for you in 5 minutes. We're just going to take it and stack it. At the end of the day, we'll take all the replaced batteries off the site. How would that be different? So you've got to balance out and see if it fits that definition for you.
Through the chair. I guess I have a concern with you saying no electrical power, but at 9 o'clock, most night it's dark. So if you're gonna be open till 9 o'clock, I don't know how you're gonna see what you're doing. And on top of that, it's my personal opinion that that is the main driveway that goes into that shopping area, and I'm facing a tent. I just don't think that is what I think should need people when they pull into any kind of a shopping center to see a tent.
Gotcha. The tent's optional. I don't need it.
Through the chair. It might be worth, Mr. Burgard and Mr. Canvasser, have you considered if there's other locations on the site that are away from the main entries that are still off of the main parking areas for the shopping center?
So I can tell pretty good what works and what doesn't, where it's located in the mall just from doing it for 14 years. You don't want to see a tent right when you pull into the mall.
I don't also want to see garbage cans and a table out there that you're holding your supplies on. That's not what I think residents should look at when they're pulling into any kind of our shopping centers in the community.
I can carry it all on my belt so that I got literally a sign.
Through the chair, I would like to ask some questions in regards to how do you advertise? Are you advertising simply by having your tent there at the entrance? Or do you know that our community has this need for the chip repair for our windshields?
It would be advertisement from Facebook to passing out flyers, not on the cars in the parking lot, but advertising on the radio.
And so then you advertise that location to come to that location, look for the tent or look for your signage that indicates to come there.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything in our community that says we need that sort of service? Like,
Yeah, I've been
how
doing
did
it-
you end up coming to?
I've been doing it all over the
48111?
country. I'm sorry. I've been doing it all over the country for 14 years. I took off just a couple years when the housing market was down. But so it works everywhere. But there's some places that it works better than others. And it just works there. That's why I spent 4 months talking to Dan and filling out the paperwork and coming back. I understand you got to do what you got to do, but in Ann Arbor, they're pretty successful with building buildings with brick and mortar, and they did it. They did it in Adrian. They do it all over. uh, and I can address anything and make it so it can be win-win for your board too. I don't know.
Through the chair.
Like I said, I don't need a lot. Just,
You didn't answer the question about most nights it's at 9 o'clock, it's gonna be dark.
okay. So it gets dark in the summer at 10. So I'm there till 10 and 11 sometimes in the dark, but we can do it. We use a black light to harden the resin. The UV light from the sun hardens it. And we don't need any electricity for that. He's got the lights in the mall, but hey, if it's dark at 8, we're out of there.
Through the chair, so
Yes.
you're saying you're out there, you leave if the weather gets bad, it gets dark, a storm comes through? Okay. I am.
Not your great entrance.
Not that I have gotten my windshield fixed, but I have gone and seen the facility at Arborland, and they've been there for years doing that. From the information that staff provided us, they indicated that this is the first time we've had an application like this. And I would like to ask staff, as a follow-up, why is that? Because I have seen this service everywhere. I've not needed it, but I've seen it everywhere, and I never thought, I've never seen it in Van Buren Township. One thing I have seen in Van Buren Township a lot is fireworks requests in every one of our shopping centers.
If I may attempt to answer that, yes, you would have seen fireworks tents and you would have seen this, but that's a temporary use for 2 weeks. We are talking about 9 months.
6.
This is essentially, even though it is getting classified under the temporary land use category, it is not comparable to any of the other temporary land uses you apply for. Tonight on your agenda, you have the fireworks tent, which has impacts, but fireworks comes year after year, but they are there just for the 4th of July time, and then they're out of there. There are very strict limits to how long we allow them. My concern with this would be, if some of the board members have been here, you would recollect when O'Reilly's Auto Parts came here, allowing them to replace their customers' windshield wipers in the parking lot was allowed as an ancillary use to the fact that they were doing retail sales of windshield wipers. We otherwise wouldn't allow them to provide that service in their parking lot. So it's just the question of when does, even though our ordinance does not prohibit a special land use from being considered as a temporary land use, at what point does a temporary land use have no time frame? I mean, 6 months is a long time to have something with none of the special land use considerations playing into it. And if you do so, what other special land uses does this open up a door to? What if you had the next special land use that came through and asked you for just 3 months? But the whole point of a special land use is to mitigate the adverse impacts. Where would we draw that line? Precedent setting is the biggest concern in this request for me, nothing else. That's the biggest challenge I'm struggling with as a planner. I have seen windshield chip repair places, but it's always been for 2 weeks or 10 days. That's how most municipalities approve it.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask staff or our consultant, I understand there's a difference between a special land use permit and a temporary land use. The minor auto repair is allowed in the same zone as this shopping center as a special land use. First question, is that true? Can you do minor vehicle repair in this zone if you get the special use permit?
Yes.
Then the second question is, are we really allowed to grant a special land use permit and a temporary land use under one temporary land use, or does it have to be procedurally followed as done as a special land use or a temporary land use? I guess I was ambiguous. I didn't understand it, really.
Dan and I got into that discussion too. We combed our ordinance, but there was nothing in the ordinance that said a special land use cannot be considered as a temporary land use, possibly because we have never really encountered such a situation before. It was never thought that a special land use would come through as a temporary land use. So that That is, itself is unusual, but there's nothing in our ordinance that specifically says you can't.
But is there anything in our ordinance that says we have to grant the special land use and then grant the temporary? I mean, it's not a two-part process. We can do it simply as a temporary land use?
By
Is it-
virtue of-
To the applicant, I'm sorry, the procedural question, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
No, good procedural questions. Vinnie can chime in as well, but, Ms. Christian can chime in as well, but I've interpreted that the temporary land use section of the zoning ordinance holds its own water and allows you to follow that process primarily. It takes precedence as long as you're establishing that it is in fact a temporary land use. And I believe the zoning ordinance
agree.
definition does not allow it to exceed a year. And so there have been some other cases where the batch plant, auxiliary uses to outdoor vehicle sales, those kinds of things would have fallen under the same category where under a permanent condition, it would require a special land use approval first, but as a temporary land use, it kind of holds its own approval process. So that part is valid.
Got it. Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions for the
Sure.
applicant or staff as well, if I could.
Commissioner Jarrett?
In the minor vehicle repair, the examples of battery replacement or wiper replacement or radiator fluid replacement, any of these sort of things that you can do to a car, when it's all in one location, if it was in a building specially designed for doing minor vehicle repair, there would be concerns for things like drainage or spills on the floor type of deal. I'm wondering if, I understand now, having seen the vial of adhesive, it's pretty small. And I don't know if it, drips as you're approaching the windshield or if there's any possibility for it getting on the parking lot. What's the drainage and cleanup situation on a site like this? It's going to be used for 6 months. Does all that drain into the storm drains? In a minor repair facility, it wouldn't. It would go to wastewater and be treated, right?
In this case, I believe, as the applicant stated, there's not as much waste generated that would actually go down the stormwater drains or so. But when you're looking at it in the larger perspective, when you're, say, replacing a radiator or you're taking out a battery and replacing, there is going to be some oils coming out. And I'm not sure. It's probably going to be washed into your storm drain. That's what is going to happen. So that's the reason why I think when minor vehicle service is defined in the ordinance, it says buildings or structures which are designed or used for the retail sales.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason is you can provide more things to address concerns such as that, drainage, any possible pollution.
For the applicant, I would ask, do you wash the windows with anything before you use the plastic? Any kind of washer fluid or
So
solvents to clean it with?
we wipe the windshield with a clean rag before we fix the chip. And then after it's finished, we wash it with windshield washer cleaner.
Nothing that wouldn't normally be found inside of a parking lot. It being used as a parking lot.
It's,
Right.
it's, the Windex.
Windex. So what you're telling me is it's a clean procedure. You're not washing the windows with a
Right.
solvent first. You're not spilling anything on the
Right.
on the ground. It's not putting any sort of real quantity of liquid on the parking surface.
So this all hardens with UV light. So if you did drop one of these and you stepped on it, the UV light hardens it and it turns into a piece of plastic. This stuff is real thin and stuff. The biggest thing that chip repair industry does is save the environment like there's no tomorrow, because of factories building windshields for no use, of semi-trucks driving them back and forth, broken ones and new ones. The exhaust is amazing, and it's just like any industry. And here we are in a few minutes saving that. And
Understood.
so that's the environment
I
thing.
could also ask the applicant, the tent is meant to be up the entire time that you have the permit, right? It's not intended to be a temporary, put it up and take it down every day type of thing,
Right.
is my understanding. What's stored inside the tent, and what kind of security do you have around that tent to keep?
So we don't keep anything at the tent. Well, maybe a fold-up table or a little cart, plastic cart,
No materials, no solvents, no adhesives.
right?
Okay. And is there any added security for this, for the tent overnight?
Security guards, no.
Nothing above and beyond what's already at the shopping center?
Right, no problem.
Did Director Power mention anything about posting a performance bond for cleanup?
Performance, it takes us a day, 2 days at the most to clean up at the end of the year. Is that what you're saying?
I'd ask Director Power, was that one of the conditions that I saw in your letter, that a performance bond should be posted? Or,
It was not, but you can consider that, and we'd have to assign a reasonable cost to that.
you didn't recommend it, though? Okay. He did not, okay. Yeah, okay. Finally, Director Power pointed out in his letter that you have to correspond to our sign ordinances, and I don't think the ones that you put in the packet,
Right,
I
it would
don't
be,
think those are conformant. You're aware that those signs aren't the ones you'd probably be able to use, right?
right, so he said 32 square feet, so probably 8 by 4. We have them smaller and we'd make a new one for the 30.
I'm concerned about setting a precedent with small vehicle repair, but I think the impact on this particular use, I mean, it doesn't seem like seems like all of the issues have been, fairly well addressed. I am concerned about the precedent setting, though. And I'm not sure about that. That's all I had to say on it, but,
Through the chair, maybe this would be for the consultant or the director. What sets the precedence, the duration or the service?
Not an easy question to answer. Precedent setting is anytime you approve a use based upon a set parameters that they're presenting to you. So anything else that comes with the same parameters, you must approve, because you have to treat every applicant fairly and the exact same manner. So, for example, the applicant runs a very clean, neat operation. It's going to be a tent, no storage. He's going to, just use the resin, no light, he's going to leave. So next, say somebody comes saying, I'm just going to help people replace battery, because not everybody knows how to do it by themselves at home. It's just easier. Somebody who knows what they're doing will probably take 10 minutes to replace a battery versus me, probably 2 hours of taking all the wrong cables and just messing up my whole truck. So if that person comes and says, we are not going to store any batteries, nothing, at the end of the day, I will load it all up in my pickup truck and I'll take it. There'll just be tables over there. I will put the battery, I'll have rags, I'll clean it, and I'll take it out. It means it's the exact same use. The parameters are the same. At the end of the day, there'll be just the table, tent, no material stored, no lights there. You'll have to treat it the same way.
Through the chair. What happens at the end of 6 months? You pack up and leave? So you're only going to be there for 6 months and make a site that I don't think should set a precedent for anybody else to set up tents in our shopping centers. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Through the chair, I'd like to ask Director Powers another question. So could you confirm, let's just say that he has a really good season, he goes 6 months. Can he reapply right after that 6 months for another 6 months?
The approval I would advise that you condition the approval on within the next year. The general time horizon of a temporary land use approval is for a year, so after another year, they could reapply.
So you say it's only good for a year? So it has to run a full year before he can apply again? So could he apply for, could he essentially adjust what he has now and go to 9 months or 10 months or 11 months?
That would be subject to the planning commission. He could reapply. I would set the condition. Typically, the planning commission has set a condition that extends not to exceed 1 year. So if you accepted a 6-month approval, say in 2024, there's an opportunity again to reapply. That's how we've typically
Is that at
done
the
it.
beginning of the year, or does he have to wait the full year?
There is no such limitation.
Yeah.
So if this season is successful and the gentleman leaves, he can come back and apply for 6 months next summer.
Or what if right after the season, he figures, well, I still am in a tent, I don't get snow on me, I can still repair windshields. Could he continue
I
on?
think the commissioner means in September. Is that right? Immediately after the 6 months that we
Yeah, well,
are
in this
talking
case,
about
it's
grant-
November, right?
November,
Yeah.
or
He would
September.
have to
for the 6
reappear
months.
before you. If you have placed a condition limiting it, he will have to come back for renewal of the temporary land use before you, because you would have said only 6 months. So if he wants to extend it another 3 months, he will have to come back before you.
Through the chair. So we would have to approve this in a year if we approve it now.
That's where I'm a little confused.
You have the ability to clarify the limits and capabilities under the time that you're authorizing. So in one scenario, you could offer a 6-month or 8-month approval, not with no opportunity for reapplication for at least 1 year following today's date, something like that. That would be a perfectly reasonable condition for any kind of temporary land use approval.
Okay, so if anyone applies, it could be good up to a year, and then they have to reapply
Yes, and we've seen that before.
for anyone. Okay.
Mhm.
So that being said, if we vote yes, we set the precedent, they come back next year, we would have to approve that, pretty much no choice, because it would be the same plan. Is that correct?
Or even longer, potentially,
I guess I would say that
depending on.
to Commissioner Paul's question, no, you have the benefit after maybe one temporary land use approval to just look in perspective at how the operation has
Yeah.
managed itself, and you have an opportunity to reevaluate whether it's responsibly managed and all those things. You reevaluate the application each year.
So, can I ask another question? So, relative to setting up a tent like this, is there a limitation as to how many of these can be set up on one site, say, this commercial property?
This application is for the one.
I know.
And so if we'd have to look at each potential application on its own merits. I don't know that the landowner would want more than one, but this would just be for the one.
Right, my concern is our ordinance, whether or not that would allow maybe 3 other people to come in and say, I want to have tents till November to do windshield wipers, or,
Yes, it
you
can.
could build a business like that.
My understanding is there are limits, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but there's limits because the shopping center has to have excess parking to begin with. You can't put this on existing parking spots that reduces available parking to below what the ordinance calls for. We couldn't turn every parking spot into a tent, that's what I'm saying. The shopping center owner has a certain number of parking spaces they must maintain.
Absolutely.
Additionally, they have to have a distance around the tent for vehicle circulation. So, I mean, there is a limit to how many tents you can put in the parking lot, but it's not 6. It's based on the size of the individual lot. where
Right.
the tents are
Many
going.
of our shopping center parking lots generally have a surplus of parking because they're based on a parking ordinance that was written a long time ago. So they do have surplus parking spots. So with leaving room for circulation and not taking away from required parking, you might have more than one tent. I'm not saying you'll have 6, but yes,
Right.
in some of them, there is a possibility, if not this one, there is a possibility of having 2, maybe 3.
And if I can address the other commissioner's question about would we have to say yes, the answer to that is no. We can reconsider it. That's why the other applicants that are here this evening are coming back every year to get permission, every year, because every year we look and see whether or not they met their performance requirements. And if they don't, they aren't going to get another permit. And I'm not telling the repeat applicants anything they don't already know.
Through the chair,
Yes.
I have another comment, question, just a thought. The place in Ann Arbor, I go by it every 2 weeks. I see them. I see their advertisement. I've only seen them in the parking lot. I've never seen another company pull up and say, hey, do you want your windshield wipers changed? Do you want your battery changed? I just think that thought might be a little maybe unreasonable. Every vehicle is going to take a certain kind of battery, a certain kind of air filter. There's just so many specifications that there'd be no way, or the person or the company would have to have a huge tent to accommodate all those different specifications. So I think that might be a little unreasonable. Like I said, I've gone to that place that I've seen in Ann Arbor, and I've never seen any other business there, and I don't know what their ordinances are. I know we have to adhere to ours, but I've never seen any other business, and they seem to be there year-round. I don't know that they're only there for 9 months. I see them all the time.
They're there for the 7 months-ish, yeah.
7 months.
Sorry.
That's my,
I'm not familiar with the business that you're referring to in Ann Arbor, but I would actually look into that. I don't know if they have any existing legal nonconformity protection, which is why, because Ann Arbor zoning ordinance is not an easy one. The fact that they're coming back year after year for 7 months might likely be that they have some kind of existing legal nonconforming status that allows them to come back year after year. And that might be the reason why you don't see any other tents. That could also be. I don't know anything about the site, but that is one possible explanation for it.
I do, I do have a question.
Yes.
I know places like AutoZone and O'Reilly's, they go about advertising that they can change out your windshield wipers, your batteries. Are they certified as minor vehicle repairs? Because they're doing it in their parking lots.
If I recollect correctly, at least for the O'Reillys that we reviewed in the township, that was discussed. It was part of their site plan approval to allow that to take place because they sell the actual batteries and the windshield wipers retail on that site. So it was part of their site plan approval as minor vehicle repair because they have a brick and mortar store attached to it.
Okay.
I think I have my last question. Director Power, is this address located in the Belleville Road Overlay District?
Yes, as with, there are several we get, I think.
Does the Belleville Road Overlay District have anything to say about putting up tents or this type of temporary use? I know Belleville Road Overlay District says a lot about high-quality architecture and form and shape and aesthetics. I'm wondering if it speaks at all to this type of setup.
I will say that the Belleville Road Overlay District would not allow this aesthetic on a permanent basis. But given the context with some of the fireworks tents and some other temporary land uses, mobile food vendors, this is another example where the temporary land use chapter of the zoning ordinance takes precedence over some of those standards as long as these are temporary uses, or at least that's the way they've been handled by the Planning Commission in the past.
Through the chair, pardon me, I'd like to ask Director Powers another question. When you say temporary, can you better define what that means based on a time frame?
Yes, there's a zoning ordinance definition, and I can pull it up. I think that might be best, but it does specify a specific 1-year time frame for approval that the, and I'm sorry, give me one moment here.
I think, from memory, and Director Power will confirm it, but I think a temporary land use is only allowed to go for 12 months before it has to be reapplied for. And there's no limitation on delay between reapplications. You know what I'm saying? So you can do a 0-day reapplication.
Okay.
You could come in before your temporary land use expires, come back and ask for another one, and perhaps get it.
Could potentially be a year-round tent business.
I'm telling you, you should let Director Power look up exactly what the ordinance is. But
Could be for anyone.
But not with, I would say not without review. I mean, it
Right,
couldn't be a
right,
year. It would have to have a minimum review period. That's my recollection of it. But my recollection isn't always perfect. So.
Yep, I will say it quickly. A structure, building, or use permitted by the Township Building Official or Planning Commission pursuant to Section 7.120 to exist during periods of construction of the principal use for special events or purposes which shall not exceed 1 year unless otherwise permitted or extended by the Township Planning Commission. Temporary uses shall be only those which are clearly short duration and involve no permanent structures. Now, the question of reapplication has come up before, and I think with Commissioner Paul's question earlier as well, the precedent setting is only precedent setting if you you may be setting up for more of a long-term condition only if you reevaluate it year after year and determine that they're still adhering to the standards you've enforced and that their business is still something that you would be comfortable seeing on a site on a longer-term basis. So they have to reapply and meet the standards at least once a year.
Right. The only thing I'm struggling with is the idea that potentially, I'm not saying that they're going to do it, that an applicant could be a tent business year-round, potentially. No, I don't think that's, in my opinion, I don't think that's sort of the thought process behind what we're doing as far as what's temporary.
And there was the statement within that definition that is clearly short in duration. So,
Right.
so I think that's part of the purview you have to put limits so that there is not a permanency to it.
Through the chair, I really think the DDA would be very unhappy if we were to permit a tent doing business 6 months. I mean, I think they understand the fireworks, it's 2 weeks, and they're gone. And to set a tent as the main entrance off of Belleville Road into one of the biggest shopping centers, and the DDA not being unhappy with that, I think I just don't even think it should be considered. I just think that's wrong.
Could I ask if staff or consultants know, what's the longest time we usually give a temporary land use for, say, a food truck? We've had a few. I just can't
I'd have to
remember.
guess, but I think the last one was more like a summer duration, like a seasonal, maybe 3 or 4 months.
3 months maybe, like height of summer, right? If that's, because we did a few of those recently. It's like 3
We
months.
went into September too, sometimes.
9 months is a no-go. I don't think that's temporary. 6 months.
You're pushing it.
Me pushing it.
Can I, through the chair, I would like to know, like, the applicant has offered to eliminate his tent. I don't know how much that impacts you, but I don't know if that gives the board more favor.
I mean, through the chair, I guess my response to that, so now he's gonna be walking around with his pocket stuff full of these resins. He's gonna have to have a chair to sit on, he's gonna have to have a table to set stuff on, and he's gonna have to have a 60-gallon trash thing. So what is he gonna look like coming into the parking lot and seeing a man sitting in a chair with a garbage can?
And an umbrella.
Through the chair, I wouldn't care what he looked like if I was a customer that needed my windshield chip repaired. For me, Mr. Canvasser is looking to bring some sort of business, some sort of traffic into his mall. The businesses that are in there, we're seeing more vacancies. This would bring us more traffic. If there's concern about the duration, I will support that. But we have to find a way to help this applicant, and you would probably also need a certain amount of months to make it worthwhile for you. What is the minimum amount of months for you to be here?
But that's not one I thought about. I guess maybe 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
Could your tent be relocated? I know that was a question she had asked, and we never got a real clear answer back that I understood. Could that tent be relocated somewhere else,
Yeah,
away from that main entrance?
yeah, we could go down towards the service drive, where there's also a lot of empty parking.
Well, depending on the service drive, now you're looking at Planet Fitness, and they pretty much fill up that parking lot most mornings.
I know what you mean, I've been there a lot, but the only other place to go is towards the pizza store behind McDonald's.
That's a really tight spot there.
Yeah, that's why we picked right in the middle, there's no traffic. That's the biggest hole in the parking lot.
Right, biggest hole, right by the main entrance.
We could slide it over a little bit towards Planet Fitness where there's all empty parking.
Mr. Chair, it sounds like there's some concerns about the minimum length of time that you could get by with functionally for the permit. There's also some concerns about the signage and what it might look like. There's concerns about the placement. Would it be appropriate for the applicant to, I mean, we don't want to put you on the spot. What's the minimum amount of time you need when you haven't had a chance to consider the business impact of it? We have another planning commission meeting in 2 weeks. Would it be appropriate to ask if the applicant wanted to take some time to consider those and come back with a more considered answer? Or would it be more appropriate just simply take it to a motion?
I don't think it'll help to come back. I don't think it'll help to come back.
You don't think it would be allowed to come back?
I don't think it would help to come back.
Oh, okay.
Through the
I-
chair, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wonder if it would be helpful. I realize there hasn't been a map of the site on the screen, so I do wonder if that would be helpful, if I can put that up overhead, just on top of the tent image, just to show. So I might provide, this is the proposed location, and just to orient you, the service drive is up, off screen. But the proposed location is, again, right there in that central location. I guess the question is whether it would move in either direction. And I'm hearing some discussion toward moving it kind of off-center, so it's not kind of the first place you see, just for a visual reference.
Move it down there, now you're looking at interfering with Arby's traffic in and out. And that gets to be an awful busy exit onto the service drive right there.
Arby's,
The blue roof is Arby's.
Huh?
The blue roof, blue roofed building is Arby's. Is that what you were looking for? Yeah, that's Arby's.
they have an entrance here and back here.
Mm-hmm.
Our tent would go right in between them.
But anybody coming out of Arby's and is gonna go to the service drive is gonna be coming right there in front of you. And you're right there on the drive.
Through the chair, I would like to support Jeff Jar answer your question. I suggest, Treasurer Barr has said that, I'm sorry, Bud has indicated that she doesn't think it would help. I say that we go to a motion. If you're willing to move, that would be further south into that parking lot. And then 4 months, limit it to 4 months and see if we can get a vote.
Okay.
I'd like to see the location, at least get it placed as opposed to just talking about potential locations. So maybe coming back in 2 weeks isn't a bad idea with a
Okay.
little bit more information. The other thing would be, till November is not going to work without lighting. Obviously, the sun sets a lot sooner. Probably you got to probably be looking as early as September, for natural day lighting. So you may want to have that information available as well.
And I think, through the chair, I think the DDA ought to be notified.
Absolutely.
If I may.
Yes.
If the DDA were to present no objection, that would be in favor. I mean, that would be evidence that maybe it would be okay in that spot. But if the DDA came back and said, not in our Belleville Road overlay district, that might be a good evidence to say, maybe not in this particular parking lot.
I I can't believe they would do that.
Well, I don't know, I haven't asked them.
Right, but I'm willing to ask them, but they are awful fussy about what you see for Belleville
And
Road.
I think your point is that it is in the Belleville Road overlay district. It's in a kind of a more special district than some of the other shopping centers, you know, where say like the firework tents have gone in the past. So I understand there's special concern there. There's more concern there. It's a higher, you know, it's, what do you want to call it? A higher bar, I guess, for that kind of use or structure in the Belleville Road overlay district. I can understand that. I totally understand the concern.
Through the chair, so I might ask the planning commission if there would be any objection if I, either as a condition of approval to research a more suitable location with coordination with the DDA director and the applicant, or as a tabling condition to be addressed before the next meeting to meet with the applicant and the DDA director to establish a location. Is that acceptable to the planning commission, and is that what you'd recommend staff to do?
I guess I'm not sure what you want to do.
So I'm asking if you would like me to meet with the DDA director and the applicant to finalize a location for the tent.
And get feedback from the DDA.
Correct.
So this would be tabled, right? Is that what you're saying?
Either as a condition of approval or as a condition of tabling.
I would not do it as a condition of approval.
Right, I agree.
Wanted that
That's
clarified.
kind of where I'm at, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, does the applicant have any concerns with us tabling it for 2 weeks until the next meeting?
Happy with that. I appreciate your help and time.
Do we have any comments from the public?
Mr. Chair, there's one comment on the screen. It's not pertaining to this request, however. So there's no comment on this request. And I believe there are two people in the audience here. Three? I guess, yeah, anybody in the audience who wants to speak to this request, please go ahead.
I'm Chuck Freeze. I'm actually here for the fireworks thing later. I just wanted to ask a question. Because I'm a part of a planning commission in ZBA in Three Rivers where I live, does this, or would this be only to this parcel? Or is your concern about the precedence to everywhere else? But if it's only to that parcel, that's just to bring up a question, so.
Precedent setting means township-wide. Every parcel in township would be subject to it.
Because of special use versus a temporary use, correct?
It's not merely the use. The fact that you are considering a use for as long a time period, which is generally classified as a special land use, opens up the box that anything that falls under that category of use should be considered anywhere in the township for the same duration, because everybody needs to be treated by the same rules, and that's why we have the ordinance. And which also brings me once again, the Belleville Road Overlay District, neither the Planning Commission nor the Zoning Board of Appeals has allowed even one applicant to bypass or get a deviation from your architectural requirements for the B-Rod.
Never. Since I've been, never.
As your planner, it's my responsibility to just tell you what the requirements are and what I see as a planner. And of course, it's up to the Planning Commission to determine it. While supporting businesses coming into the community is a very good thing, I'm all for it. After all, planners wouldn't have a job if we didn't support businesses coming in. That said, you need to be very aware when you're opening up an interpretation on a particular use. If later on you have regrets, there is no turning that clock back.
Going to say, is there any other comments? Okay, do we have some action by the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chair, I would propose a motion that we table this item until such time as the applicant can provide us with the minimum amount of time his application could be for, and for staff to alert the DDA of the situation and obtain feedback on the issue. When those two conditions are met, we can take it back off the table and review. That is my motion.
Is there support for the motion?
Support.
We have a motion by Commissioner Jar, supported by Commissioner Atchison. Can we have a roll call vote on the motion, please?
Bernie Grant,
Yes.
Bud,
No, on the grounds that I don't think a tent will ever be what the DDA would approve, so I think we're wasting our applicants' time.
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Jackson Paul,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes, on the grounds that I'd like to hear what the DDA's input was, if not for this case, but for future ones involving tent sales.
and Brian Cullen.
Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we move along now to item 2. Case number 23-009, Ricardo Incorporated, temporary land use. The applicant, Ricardo Incorporated, is requesting temporary land use approval to operate a mobile refueling station at 4000 Ricardo Drive, Van Buren Township, Michigan, 48111. It's located at parcel number V 125-830-047-00702, which is 40,000 Ricardo Drive. This property is located on Ricardo Drive, which is on the east side of Haggerty Road, north of Tyler Road. Ricardo Incorporated requests a temporary refueling station for hydrogen-fueled vehicles. This activity is proposed from April of 2023 to June of 2023. We first will have presentation by staff. He's got it backwards here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
Point of privilege. I think the Zoom machine is not muted, and it keeps making a noise over there. I'm wondering if we could.
Thank you. Mr. Canvasser, I will remove your panelist position here on tonight's meeting, but if you want to speak to the other requests, feel free to raise your hand again. I'll just one moment away.
Thanks, Director Power. I know those Zoom recordings are sometimes hard to listen to. The audio is weak at the best of times on those.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, did you say it's time for the staff's presentation?
Normally, that's what's first. You've got the applicant listed first. I hope it isn't a problem swapping that order.
In fact, that should not be a problem. Perhaps the applicant could state their request, go over the basics, and mention some of the history. I know this request has been made in a very similar fashion in the past, so we may as well hear from the applicant per the agenda, and then I'll go over my staff
Okay.
findings.
Thanks for putting those up there. Thank you, Director Power. Thank you, Planning Commission, for your consideration of our request. My name is Theodore Byrne, and I work with Ricardo Incorporated. We've been in the community in Van Buren Township for over 30 years at Ricardo Drive. This request is something that we have requested twice previously and has been approved in 2016 and 2018, I believe it was. And it is as the picture depicts here, a self-contained hydrogen refueling station. This is in support of project activity that we do. So this is a vehicle that will be powered by hydrogen as a fuel source. It will not be a fueling station. I don't want to have it misperceived in that it's only to test and verify the function of the hydrogen tanks for the vehicle. It will be located at our facility in a confidential parking lot. So this is not visible to the general public. It's secured. It's under CCTV. And it, as you can see here, it's located in that parking lot, and those yellow highlighted are barriers to prevent anyone from accidentally bumping into it. I should say my role with Ricardo is the Quality, Health, and Safety and Environmental Manager. And I've been with the company for 28 years. Any questions for me?
Okay,
Presentation by the staff.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll briefly summarize the findings from this report. As with the last request on tonight's agenda, this is a temporary land use request subject to the criteria of section 7.120 of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance. This use is in a M1 zone parcel on Ricardo Drive, which is east of Haggerty Road, near Tyler Road. So a very different land use context. I'll just run through the findings briefly. We look again at the adequacy of parking and access. The proposed use is in a location that does not impede access. And as you can see on the image on the screen, there's roughly 20 feet of maneuverable space adjacent to the proposed use, adjacent to some existing parking. So access should not be an issue. With respect to drainage, drainage also should not be an issue. There's a existing parking lot that this will be placed on, so there will not be an increase in impervious surface coverage. The site is zoned M1 light industrial, so compatibility with surrounding land uses is established. The proposed reuse is permitted on parcels zoned this way and is compatible with the surroundings. The size, height, and type of construction of the proposed buildings and structures in relation to the surrounding uses has been reviewed. There's no building to be constructed. It's a temporary mobile unit, as you can see on the screen. That sufficient setbacks from road rights of way are met. And in this case, the location of the proposed use meets the 50-foot front yard, 40-foot rear yard, and 40-foot side yard setbacks for this zoning district. That there are adequate utilities. The proposed use does not require any utilities on the site. Similarly, there's no expected trash or waste that's anticipated to be developed based on this use. Sanitary facilities will be those in the existing site, so sanitary facilities are not something that need to be considered. The expected hours of operation are again during normal business hours of 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. There are no other licenses or permits required for the proposed use. And per past correspondences with the applicant, the proposed use creates little, if any, noise. So there's not expected to be any noise, odor, dust, or glare from the proposed use, which impacts surrounding properties or the public. Regarding fire lanes, fire protection, and security, the location leaves adequate access to the lot it is placed in. I did attach the fire marshal's previous report from 2018, and now we have the new fire marshal and deputy fire chief's report. And I'll briefly summarize some of the conditions, which are very similar to what were placed in 2018 when this was last considered. That the dispensing facility shall be certified as meeting the requirements of this code by a qualified engineer. And I'm just going to summarize that the hydrogen dispensing system shall be leak tested, that system maintenance shall be performed as required by manufacturer's instructions, that dispensing equipment shall be provided with hydrogen gas detection, leak detection, and flame detection, that there shall be notification of unauthorized release to the fire department, that personnel shall be trained in the hazards of the materials employed and actions required by an emergency plan, and that there is protection from vehicular damage. So those are the new fire marshal's comments on this request. Additionally, the request is not anticipated to have significant off-site impacts or traffic volumes. There's no need for a performance guarantee or insurance for this use. And with respect to other concerns which may impact the public health, safety, or welfare, the proposed use entails chemical storage within the refueling unit, which would cause concern if the chemicals were not stored properly. However, the applicant has outlined safety measures and guidelines to show that the unit is safe. So this would be the third application of this proposed use, and it has demonstrated no issues in the past. Subject to compliance with the conditions set forth by the Township Fire Marshal, I do recommend approving this temporary land use. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can I add something? I would just add that this is a production unit that is built by and supplied by Air Products. So they're a national firm that is distributing these throughout the country. And the use will be exactly the same as the conditions of the previous permit that were approved.
Okay. Do we have any comments from the Planning Commission? Questions or comments? Commissioner Jar?
Question for the applicant. What does Ricardo Inc. do?
Engineering consulting firm. We're based in the UK, but we've been at this location, as I said, for 30 years now. We started out at Samuel Barton Drive and then built the facility at 40,000 Ricardo Drive.
And this unit that you're requesting temporary use for is part of testing a vehicle that's under engineering review?
It is only to be used to place the hydrogen in the tank for the prototype vehicles that are built.
It's a prototype vehicle that's under test, and you're filling them up.
Of them. Test is a bit of a stretch. There's not really any testing per se. It's just verification of the hydrogen unit that'll be placed on it.
I'm formerly a quality assurance engineer, so I appreciate the need for sometimes bringing in that kind of equipment in order to run the verification that you need to do.
I appreciate talking to a fellow quality person.
I really have no other questions.
Any other members? Any questions concerning this? Is there any comments from the public?
I again see the same chat comment as was there for something later on the agenda. I have no other comments from the audience.
Okay, in that case, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Jar?
I move to grant the applicant Ricardo Incorporated the temporary land use approval to permit operation of a mobile refueling station at the site located at 40,000 Ricardo Drive from March 2023 through the end of May 2023?
There's a shift in those dates only because of the fact that we're almost through March now. So we asked that it be from April through June.
Through June.
And I'd sent that to Director Power.
Sorry, I didn't make my copy. So you're requesting from, I see, from April through the end of June?
Correct.
Okay, at the site located at 40,000 Ricardo Drive from April 2023 through the end of June 2023, based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the letter of staff dated March 16th, 2023, and the letter from VBT Fire dated March 21st, 2023. So submitted.
Do we have a support for the motion?
Support.
Support by Commissioner Grant. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Bernie Grant,
Yes.
Medina Atchison,
Yes.
Jackson Paul,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good luck with the testing.
Okay. Item number 3 on the agenda tonight. Case 23-013, TNT Fireworks at the Walmart site, temporary land use. Excuse me. The applicant, TNT Fireworks, is requesting a temporary land use permit to conduct a temporary outdoor fireworks tent sale located at 10562 Belleville Road. This site is located in the Walmart parking lot, which is on the west side of Belleville Road, south of Tyler Road. The activity is proposed from June 22nd, 2023 to July 5th of 2023. Presentation first from the township staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request that has been reviewed similarly in the past by the Planning Commission, so I'll briefly give an overview of my findings. This would be after several years of the TNT fireworks locating at this site at the Walmart. The findings are still based on section 7.120 of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance for temporary land uses, with the caveat that there are some provisions in state law that also influence firework tent sales. So under section 7 of the Michigan Public Act 256 of 2011, local units of government are limited in their ability to regulate the sale of fireworks in their communities. However, so long as local ordinances do not prohibit firework vendors from undertaking their operations, the ordinance is not preempted by that act. So there are some abilities we have to regulate firework tent sales. So I'll go through the findings for temporary land uses again. With respect to adequacy of parking and access, this site has 714 parking spaces, 20 of which are barrier-free. This use and the surrounding buffer will occupy roughly 18 parking spaces, so parking is not a concern and sufficient access is available. Drainage is not a concern at this location. The surrounding parcels are all commercial in nature, and so this temporary land use is not expected to impact the surrounding commercial uses. Regarding size, height, and type of construction of the proposed buildings and structures in relation to the surrounding site, the tent is temporary in nature, and the parking lot, Walmart store, and the surrounding commercial businesses will not be impacted by the tent. The only change to the proposed buildings and structures in comparison with past applications is the addition of a storage unit for goods at nighttime. There are sufficient setbacks with over 100 feet from the southern lot line and 20 feet from the interior service road. So setbacks have been adequately addressed. TNT Fireworks will supply its own electrical generation, and that generator that's proposed will be inspected to ensure compliance with the national NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association requirements. TNT Fireworks will be responsible for all trash disposal on the site in accordance with their lease agreement with Walmart, and Walmart has authorized TNT to use its restroom facilities. So utilities, trash disposal, and sanitary facilities are not a concern. The proposed hours of 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. are consistent with the hours that have been employed in the past. We have not had complaints on those hours. I will mention that our fireworks ordinance that was previously adopted in 1986 requires fireworks sales to conclude by 9 p.m. However, Act 256 preempts that and requires the allowance of later sales. There are no exterior lights provided. With regard to signs, again, a 32 square foot temporary sign will be considered for approval, not to exceed that size and only for a period of 30 days. The current consumer fireworks retail facility license must be provided, and I know I received a submittal from Mr. Fries recently for that, so that has been provided. Potential noise, odor, dust, and glare. The proposed use should not increase the noise, odor, dust, or glare at the site. The Van Buren Township Fire Marshal has reviewed the application regarding fire lanes, fire protection, and security, and the site will be continually staffed. Off-site impacts of traffic volumes are not anticipated to be of significant concern. There were some concerns raised during a previous public hearing, and no fireworks are permitted to be launched within 300 feet of the site. The property owner will be responsible for returning the site to its pre-sale condition. And then regarding other concerns which may impact the public health, safety, or welfare, there are no additional concerns in these regards. TNT Fireworks has demonstrated responsible usage of the site in the past. There have been no issues raised. So I do offer that the Planning Commission should, I recommend conditional approval subject to the conditions noted in the Van Buren Township Fire Marshal and Deputy Chief's report, that all proposed signage complies with the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance, and that all application materials shall refer to Van Buren Township and not Belleville. I'm happy to answer any questions about the findings in my report.
Okay, presentation by the applicant.
Chuck Freeze with TNT Fireworks. I think it's about our 10th year we've been given the opportunity to work with you guys, and I want to say thank you, first of all, for that, and giving us a few extra days, more than your typical 7-day temporary sale. The nature of the 4th of July, it changes on which day of the week it is every year, so we try to do a 2-weekend scenario, so they see us the first weekend when they're shopping, and then they come back closer to the 4th of July. So again, any other questions you might have? I think we've done a good job here and decent track record, but always want to help if you do have any other questions.
Okay, any comments from the planning commission? Do we have any comments from the public?
I do not see any hands raised or new comments regarding this item, no.
Okay, with that in mind, do we have a movement by the planning commission?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Jar.
on the assumption that the dates have not changed, I move to grant the applicant Charles Freese of TNT Fireworks temporary land use approval to permit operation of a temporary outdoor fireworks tent sale at the site located at 10562 Belleville Road from June 22nd, 2023 to July 5th, 2023, based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the letter of staff dated March 16th and the letter from the fire marshal dated also March 16th, respectfully submitted for your consideration.
Any support for the motion? Support Commissioner Grant. Could we have a roll call, please?
Medina Atchison. Yes. Bernie Grant. Yes. Sherry Budd. Jackson Paul. Yes. Jeff Jar. Yes. Brian Cullen.
Yes. You have your temporary land use. Thank you. Hope it's successful. And that moves us to item number 4. It's discussion. Residential zoning ordinance text amendment. And we're being requested to begin consideration of a zoning ordinance text amendment, excuse me, to allow building height to be limited to the more restrictive of the following standards under section 3.106D of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance. 30 feet in height, 2.5 stories, as amended from the current limit of 2 stories. And presentation from the staff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Does everybody have a printed packet tonight? Because I would, okay. What I'd like to do, and I'm not locating my printout currently of the image I'd like to put on the screen, but there's just one image I think I'd like to show, and perhaps Commissioner Pollock, I see your, oh, you have the digital as well.
You need mine.
Do you have an
Mary?
extra one?
It's-
Yes, that's exactly it.
It's
Thank
the
you.
colored one.
I don't have it in my printout, I don't have the whole section.
No,
in
I
my
didn't have,
packet.
we didn't get it in the packet, I don't
Oh,
think.
was it added?
Maybe there was, no, that was in the electronic packet, but I guess that section of the print packet didn't make it out, so I apologize. I apologize for that.
That's on the screen.
Yeah, we'll just put this up on the screen. Yep, I think it focuses in itself, so.
The agenda item was, but.
Yep, it's on the agenda. It should have been in the electronic packet. I apologize if it didn't make the print versions. But I would like to just give some context as to why this is on the agenda tonight. The request again is to take a closer look at section 3.106D of the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance, which restricts building height in our R1A, R2A, R1B, and R1C single-family residential districts. It limits height to 30 feet and 2 stories. And this is an item that has been brought into focus as part of a administrative building permit review that staff has undertaken recently. Staff has been reviewing a building application for a home on Ormond Drive, 13125 Ormond Drive. This is a home that actually had previously had a permit that was expired, and they reapplied for a building permit recently. In reviewing the building permit application closely, staff, namely myself and the building official, had observed that the home, which by the way is not either of these houses, this is just a visual reference, I apologize, but the home that was applied for has 2.5 stories and meets the 30-foot height requirement otherwise, which in most cases, our homes in Van Buren Township have a typical gable roof. The height is measured as the halfway point between a eave and a peak for a gable roof. In finding this, staff had realized that there was some ambiguity in the way that the ordinance was written, whether we were to interpret that 2.5 stories or the height, if the height is more restrictive at 30 feet, could be applied, or do both standards apply? Based on the ambiguity and realizing that this was something that could be looked at in different ways, staff thought it was best to approach the BZA with their role in interpreting zoning ordinances, interpreting appeals from zoning ordinance language. And the BZA did take this issue up at their meeting, their most recent meeting on March 14th. And the result of that, there was some good discussion, and there was no action taken at that meeting regarding the issue because there was a split vote on that. But one of the items that the BZA asked for staff to continue pursuing was to bring this topic up for discussion with the Planning Commission to review the zoning ordinance language, while also allowing the applicant on Ormond Drive to pursue potentially a variance if needed. So we wanted to honor that path forward, and Commissioner Jar, serving on the BZA also, if you have anything to add, feel free. But we wanted to begin that conversation with the Planning Commission. The justification that staff has found for the basis of this discussion, which is that perhaps it's beneficial to cap residential building height based on the height in feet and not necessarily based on the number of stories, is for a number of reasons. One reason that you see on the screen here is that there would be some homes that, presuming that they meet the 30-foot height requirement, would become non-conforming if we say that you are capped at 2.0 stories for residential homes. So these are a couple of examples of homes that do have 2.5 stories, assuming that those dormer windows represent a half floor on the top level. And that would apply to a number of properties, I believe 8 properties in the township. One of the other major reasons is because with the intent of the zoning ordinance, one of the key aspects of the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance is to regulate and limit the height and bulk of buildings and other structures. If the intent is to limit the height and bulk of buildings and other structures, the height itself should be the limiting factor, and not necessarily whether there's a room on an upper level or a couple of rooms on an upper level and a half story or a full story. As long as building code and other requirements are met. The thought is that the Planning Commission might find that it should not matter whether there are 2 or more stories as long as the height limit is met. And then finally, to provide for creativity in the development of residential housing in the township, to be responsive to some of the goals and objectives of the master plan to create new forms of residential development in the township, and to allow people to perhaps retrofit or modernize their homes. We want the Planning Commission to consider either uncapping the number of stories or increasing the allowable number of stories to respond to the height limit rather than the number of stories limit. So that's the conversation we wanted to start this evening based on the direction from the BZA. And we have our planning consultant here who has probably some good insight as well, so I'd like to hear from Vidya as well.
Thank you, Dan. This started off a discussion, like a very vigorous discussion among all the planners in McKenna. So I threw the question out there to all the planners. We have 20 deep. I'm like, so how do you manage it in all your clients? So most of them said, I said, is it the height or is it the stories? Is it and? Is it or? And most of them said it is and. But most of the municipalities also have it as 2.5 stories, not 2 stories for single family. Our residential district says 2 stories. It says 2 stories and 30 feet. In many municipalities, it is 2.5 stories and 30 feet. The maximum you can possibly fit into 30 feet building height cannot be more than 3 stories because you cannot meet the building code requirement for ceiling height, and then you have ceiling height, then you have the joists, then you have the ceiling height, even with probably what, Commissioner Grant, correct me if I'm wrong, 7-foot ceiling heights, you would probably get to that?
Yes.
8-foot ceiling heights. So then I went to the next question. We started arguing. We are like, okay, playing the devil's advocate, I asked some of my colleagues, I'm like, how does it matter how many stories they can squeeze in if the building height is still limited to 30 feet? They are like, it's 30 feet. If you want 2 stories with like 12-foot ceiling heights, okay, put those in. But if you want more living space and you want to squeeze in 3 stories, why not? So some of the arguments that came out of that is the mass that it creates, the illusion that it is, even though it is still only 30 feet, the illusion it creates when you have 3 rows of windows. It gives you the feeling that it is a taller building, even if it's not. It's all in the visual. So then I had input from Adam, our new urbanist designer. I mean, Adam has done work in Europe and all over the US. So he's like, from a new urbanist standpoint, it should be or. It should just be the height. It shouldn't be the stories. You should not dictate to people how their living space should be designed. He said the only place where you have to limit the number of stories and the height should be where form-based code is followed. So that if you have, say, a downtown and you have all 2-story buildings with windows, you want to make sure that the building height also comes with the number of stories, so all the windows line up, creating a cohesive look to the downtown. So he said where there is form-based code, it makes sense to regulate the number of stories at all. But he said if you're talking about individual residential neighborhoods, as long as you're limiting it at 30 feet, if they want to put in 3 stories, why not? So there are 2 schools over here that you can go by. Building mass is one thing that definitely, if you look at 2 buildings, one that's got 2 stories and one that's got 3 stories, you'll swear the 3-story building is taller, even though they are both 30 feet. That's because when you try to get a 3rd story in, your roof pitch goes from this, you drop the slope of the pitch. So yeah, you go to just about, you try to, so the building looks like a bigger mass in front of you. Exactly. We can say no flat roofs, and you can also regulate the minimum slope or pitch that must be maintained so you don't have something that goes like, straight up 3 stories and blocks. So in order to maintain the residential character, for example, the 2 homes that you see up there, both of them do have pitched roofs. Both of them do have the slopes. So if you can maintain a minimum slope, those are probably 2.5 stories, which I don't think is a bad look at all because it renders itself even to traditional architecture. I honestly have no idea behind the history where only 2 stories came in our ordinance. It probably predates me too. So I don't know why we have 2 stories and not 2.5, because a lot of ordinances I see have it as 2.5 stories, because that is a half story that you see up there in both of those. It's just not a bad look because the roof still has got its pitch and a residential character. So that is additional food for thought. So Dan and I were like discussing this. We were like, what's wrong with 30 feet? I mean, as long as they stay within it. And if we say, okay, you can't go to flat roofs and the roof has to maintain certain pitch. So if they want to put in another half story, like the building, the Ormond Drive structure that specifically came up, that is still a pretty attractive looking structure that they're proposing, but the fact that they don't meet the technical requirement of our ordinance stopped them where they were. So if the Planning Commission would like to provide us with some guidance, do you think it should be just the feet or the stories? Okay. So I think Commissioner Grant would be able to, from an architectural standpoint, advise us better on the roof slope and what can be fitted into, like, the attic living space, which makes it a half story or something. Maybe we should make it 2.5 stories, or, we should say 30 feet, how many other stories, but the roof pitch cannot be below a certain amount so that you don't make it like, like a big building, block building with like the just teeniest of roofs on it. So there are solutions, I think, but what is the solution that the Planning Commission would prefer to go by?
I apologize through the chair, just add on to very quickly one thing that that Ms. Christian just said is that section 5.114 of our zoning ordinance does require that all detached single-family residential dwellings are aesthetically compatible in design and appearance with other residences in the vicinity. So that can mean different things, but
Yeah.
generally we do have some latitude to
Oh, we do
evaluate
have that, okay.
adjacent roof pitches and make sure we're not having flat roofs next to pitched roofs, just to add on to that part.
Yeah, good point.
We to discussion?
Yes, we're to discussion now, I believe. Okay.
So I was in the BZA meeting in which we decided this needed to go to Planning Commission because it was being viewed as an interpretation of the existing ordinance. The general feeling was that while the applicant that was used as an example and came to talk to the BZA as an example, not as an applicant for a variance, but
Yeah.
simply a staff-provided example, we felt for their plight. And it seemed like their 2.5-story house, it's pretty attractive, right? It wasn't, not bad, it's acceptable, but the ordinance really says 2 feet. The BZA was asked to make an interpretation on the spot as to what that ordinance actually meant. And were the BZA to make that interpretation in that meeting at that time, then the story restriction would have been removed from our ordinances across all of the residential districts, bypassing the Planning Commission input and bypassing the Township Board of Trustees vote and bypassing the electorate who elected them. Didn't feel like that was really the appropriate path to fixing this problem. But I do think that 2.5 stories has merit and is worth considering, absolutely worth considering. For the pictures of the houses that are on the screen, those are, we'll assume that the upper floors are livable. They may not be. Those might be architectural dormers. We don't know that that's a 2.5-story house because it is required to be finished on the inside for that to count as a 2.5-story, but it's reasonable to assume, as an example, that those are 2.5-story houses. They don't look bad. They're 2.5 stories because the upper floor takes up less than half the space of the floor above it and is located under a pitched roof. A half-story can't be located under a flat roof.
Correct.
So 2.5 stories, that doesn't seem unreasonable. But completely eliminating the story count, which effectively makes it 3, that's a different thing. Now, at McKenna, you have someone on staff, Paul, that is a new modern architecture guy, right? Is new urbanist? What was it?
Adam. Adam is
Adam.
the new urbanist.
The
Paul
new urbanist.
is the form-based code expert.
There we go. There we go.
Paul.
So in looking at this before the BZA meeting, I looked at new modernist architecture, 3-story buildings in small envelopes, 3 stories high. They've all got flat roofs. They look like they are reaching towards the heavens, like you said, because that's the look they have at 3 stories. Very much so not in keeping with the architecture that we have in this township at all. Even in the Belleville Road Overlay District, for example, we have regulations that say when you're allowed to put a 3-story building next to a 1-story building. You're not. There has to be some transition in order to make the area look good. Again, that's form-based. I would say that while there is an ordinance clause that says that any structure has to be, Dan said it, he read it, it has to be harmonious, it has to fit with the local architecture. There's some protection against someone putting a 3-story modern urbanist house right in the middle of Haggerty subdivision, say, 1-story ranches for the most part. We would have some protection there. We wouldn't have any protection against someone building 3-story houses with flat roofs in a modernist architecture style in any new development in the township. And I felt that while I'm not against that necessarily, the removal of the stories as a criteria may have unintended consequences that we need to consider. It's not as simple as moving from, hey, let's go from 2 to 3, or let's remove the story limit. It necessarily changes the type of architecture that we allow in the township. And again, I'm not an architect. Commissioner Grant probably more to speak on this than I do, but it definitely seemed like going directly to 3 stories was perhaps fraught with unintentional consequences, that we would want our consultants to come back and bring us examples of what the type of houses we would be allowing in would be before we agreed to it. I will say that having looked at it for a while, I'm not so big on 3 stories. I'm not convinced that's the right path to do. But 2.5 stories, because those end up being dormer roofs under a peaked roof, hey, that has some merit, you know, and that's something we might want to consider. I would ask that we have our consultants, McKenna, staff's very competent in their analysis, but McKenna has the more statewide, the statewide view and a reach through other communities.
Dan and I discuss everything, so we both make sure we are both
Absolutely.
on the same track.
Absolutely.
And we are understanding we are not going in opposite directions.
But I would want to know from McKenna, you know, are there communities that have gone from a 2-story architecture and said, you know what, 2.5 is fine? Did they have any problems? What were the unexpected issues? If not problem, maybe not even problems, but what were the unexpected issues that would come up from doing that? I don't feel like I have enough experience. I have just enough experience to know that there could be a problem. I don't have enough experience to know what those problems might be, and because of that, I'm not comfortable just saying, let's go make it 2.5 stories, make it so, without further analysis.
Maybe graphics also showing you with a 30-feet building height, how would a 2-story house look with a pitched roof versus a 2.5-story? I mean, how big can a two, and
Yeah,
our
what's-
ordinance has got clear definition for a half-story, thankfully, so it's not going to take up the whole of the,
To be under a peaked roof, and it must take up a certain percentage of the
maybe
floor
some
space.
graphics
But if we
also.
went straight to 3 stories, you know, that very topmost story would no longer be what we'd call a half story. It could be a full story, and it could be under essentially a flat roof, since we don't have any regulations against flat roofs. That is why in the BZA meeting, I was very concerned that we took it to Planning Commission for further study, because it didn't seem, while it seemed like a very easy decision to go from 2 to 3, sometimes going from 2 to 3 has unintended consequences, and we owe it to our community to at least give it the proper amount of thought before we move forward with it. That was my logic at the time. Thanks for letting me state it.
Just to be clear, we're not talking about 3 stories.
Yeah, I think that was the original request in front of the BZA, and I think in my electronic copy, the 2.5s were crossed out and were printed as 3s. So I think we are talking about 3s.
Well, because I mean, my first thought, and I think it's worth studying, is I think you need both controlling factors in, your 30 and 2.5. Because you could have 2.5 that exceeds 30, still with a half story, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, because the plate, you know, at the second floor ceiling is a controlling point for the pitch.
Yeah.
So as long as you maintain that and you don't allow it to go flat, you're going to be, you know, you're going to have that ability to have a livable space. But then again, you got to give some consideration to, do you want to start talking about slope on a roof? Because I mean, you can get pretty flat. I mean, not flat, but pretty close, and I'm not sure aesthetically that starts to blow up the, you know, the volume of the house and the mass of it much larger, and I don't necessarily feel that's what we're looking for right now.
I have come across ordinances that define at what point the pitch would be considered as a flat roof. It's not necessarily this is a flat roof. Beyond a certain pitch, it's classified into the flat roof category.
Right.
So maybe we can.
Clear, though, our ordinance doesn't prevent perfectly flat roofs. They're discouraged, I think is the exact, the word in it, are strongly discouraged for various reasons, but they aren't prohibited.
I haven't found anything
And
prohibited,
even if you
no.
have a very slight pitch from a layman's standpoint, 30 feet down below looking up, it's going to look flat, whether it is or not.
So, you know,
I've seen that issue happen, especially on the lakeside. If you're on the lakeside and you're going by on your boat, a 3-story, even if it's within 30 feet, looks like a huge structure when you go past it.
So a question regarding the story. We're talking about 30 feet.
Right.
Are we using the word or is that still up for?
No, we are doing and. We are still doing and, but rather than 2 and 30, I think the suggestion is how about looking at 2.5 and 30?
So thinking about the slope, I think you guys started to speak to it. Are we measuring the 30 feet from the back of the house or the front of the house?
The average grade at the front of the house to the halfway point between the eave and the peak of the roof for a
So-
typical gable roof.
So there won't be a
Go ahead.
you should probably speak to this
No.
then.
No, because it actually, based on the definition, if you look at the slope of the roof, it's not to the peak, which could be higher than 30 feet,
That's
correct?
right. That's
It's
correct.
to the midpoint of the peak. Building height is measured to the midpoint of the peak. So
Where does it start? Where do we put
the
them?
grade, I think our ordinance says starts at the grade at the front of the
So,
property,
so
right?
in a walkout basement scenario, that would probably exceed, it would be even taller in the back. So the 30 feet would be measured in the front of the home.
Be okay.
Yep.
The back being taller.
Yes. And I should also mention, that raises a good point. One of the things that I believe the BZA had asked is that we also consider the height in feet. I haven't made any recommendations on that at this time. I do think that would require a lot of study. But I want to mention in honor, the BZA also asked the Planning Commission to consider whether 30 feet was what they wanted.
Specifically, I asked. That was me. I said, well, if we're going to consider the stories, maybe we should consider the feet, and then everybody looked at me. So maybe not.
Challenge with touching the feet is because we have had 30 feet for such a long time in our ordinance. If we touch that, we might unintentionally make a lot of structures non-conforming.
Absolutely. And those unintended consequences were where, in that discussion, I was becoming
Yeah.
very concerned about, you change one number a little bit.
Yes.
You mean to allow something that looks good, but you end up allowing other structures that maybe
Absolutely.
you didn't think of. And that's why, not saying which way is right, I'm just saying we need to consider it and see examples of what could happen if we're going to change it.
Is the intent that this applies to all private homes?
All principal buildings in the R1,
Or one, okay.
et cetera, zoning districts. I have also recommended the ag district to be considered because that's also an area where single-family detached dwellings are a principal building, and they
So
stay
if
the same height.
someone came in and they wanted to build a two-story home, but they wanted it to be very modern, and and part of that is, like an international style building, home, could it be flat? I mean, we have some on the lake already. You should know.
Oh, I know.
Your neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely.
They probably technically could. There's some discretion in that
Okay.
terminology of compatibility with the surrounding areas, but there's no prohibition on flat roofs.
Well, I mean, yeah. Okay, so if they wanted to build it, but they had a site they really liked and a couple houses around it had pitched roofs and they wanted a flat one, could they still be considered would this stop them from doing?
We'd probably look at a variety of factors, the materials used, the color. If the flat roof is the only thing that sets it apart, we may consider that. That's something that staff has discretion on. I have not seen a flat roof come across in the permits in the
It could
last 2
fall
years.
under the significantly different. I mean, you are allowed to have significant difference from your neighbors, so the whole point was you're not all cookie cutter, but at the same time, you're not like so off that you're a misfit in the neighborhood where you are.
I thought where we had to be significantly different only applied to like a planned
Subdivision thing.
residential development,
Or a
just a
sub.
PRD.
That's correct.
So if it's out,
It's true.
Site condominiums and subdivisions, yes. Yep.
Yes.
So formal developments, yep.
so what you brought up though is you were concerned about where it's an R1, but say it's out on acreage. I think that's what you were alluding to, and that somebody wanted to maybe do something that's 32 feet tall?
That was my thought on it too. If you had a property out in an R1 district and they were on a 10-acre parcel, and they want to go 50 feet high, well, I mean, yeah, I don't know, is that okay? They're out in the middle of a field? Maybe it's worth considering it in some of the districts. If they were to do it in a high-density district, though, I would think maybe 50 feet in the air when the minimum lot size is only 50 feet might not be so reasonable. So that's why I thought maybe
50-foot tall house, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Whoa, 50-foot, treehouse.
That Commissioner Grant mentioned, is that 50 feet? The one on Belleville Road that you're speaking to, the flat roof?
Oh, no, it's on Belleville Lake. It's,
Right, the one I'm speaking of, there's two of them right next to each other.
They're
It's
50
on that-
feet tall?
I don't know, it's
No,
big. You know
those
what
are
I'm
those,
talking about? Not the one-
rectangular, I forget what they call it, arabesque architecture. They're stone and they have sort of a flat
Looks like
roof
a
and
castle.
they look like the two
not
castles.
sure,
Yeah, they look like
I'm not familiar with it.
castles.
I'm not picturing how many stories they are at this time either.
They're more than three.
Where-
I've every time I go by, I have to look at them.
Off the South Service Drive, correct? Yeah.
I can't think of that road, by the power line.
Oh, yep,
Yeah.
yep. Because you can see them from from a service drive.
I don't think,
50 feet is,
They have a castle there,
feet is way too tall.
That's way tall.
Yeah, they got like,
round,
they got like
a turret at the top.
turret at the top of these pillars.
And then
Yes.
there's the garage at the bottom.
I'm not sure we should ever open up 50 feet for a single residential, right? That's an apartment building. 50
Well,
feet is an
part-
apartment building. It's not.
Considering it is considering why we shouldn't.
Commissioner Atchison, Commissioner Drow, you raised good questions about whether we were talking about contemplating higher heights on ag or large acreage R1 sites. I hadn't contemplated that
Yeah.
in my findings yet. What I was actually asking the planning commission to consider is to also include the ag district just in general as part of this discussion, because they also have a lot of single-family residential dwellings, and they also cap at 2.0 stories. So to include those would be appropriate, I think.
Since the issue about the 2 and the 2.5 stories is more pressing at this time, would you like us to work on that first? Because trying to raise 50 feet in ag, that,
Yeah, 30 feet.
I've never even seen a home that big, so.
30 feet's fine with me. But like I said, I do think the raising it to 2.5 stories could have merit. And I'd like to see a report on what that would do to our housing. And yeah, I'd like to just see a report on it and what other communities have found when they do this. Because clearly we've had at least one request, and well, there are houses that appear to be 2.5 stories.
Right.
Let's consider it. That's what I'm thinking.
Examples of communities where it's only 2 stories and what kind of housing stock they have versus those that have 2.5 stories and what kind the 2.5 stories
And-
looks like.
And if you have any communities that did this change,
Switch,
that's
okay.
really where I'm interested in hearing what was the experience of other communities who increased this. Were there many neighborhoods that were previously, 1-story house, 2-story houses that, with a peaked roof that suddenly put in dormer windows and finished the attic space, or was it really a non-issue? And that was my concern.
Is there a possibility we won't find any such communities? And if not,
There is,
The first, then we are a trend-setting community. We're
And I
a
guess that-
leading community.
and what may set us apart is, I think Ms. Christian said that many communities do have 2.5 stories and
Yeah.
not 2 as the limit. So we may be kind of unique in
I
what we
think
have
when Dan
currently.
first pointed it out to me for a second, it took me, I'm like, what, 2 stories? Like Dan said, yeah, we allow only 2. I'm like, not 2.5? So I was a bit surprised because mostly I've come across 2.5
And
stories. So
I'd
this
also
was
add that,
unusual.
in our ordinance, if we do, whatever our decision is, we should probably go back and modify the ordinance for clarity, because it does say 2 stories, and we have a separate definition for what a story is versus what a half story is. The limitation is on feet and stories. The limitation doesn't necessarily, I think it does include half stories, but it isn't 100% clear that the limitation applies to half stories, which are defined separately in our document. They're a separate measurement, right? They're a separate thing. So further down in our tables, 2.5 is called out as 2.5 as a limitation, but in our R1 districts, the column says 2. It doesn't say 2.0, it just says 2. So you might think that that meant 2 full stories and half story not specified. That could be ambiguous. So if we were to be consistent in our ordinance and do an edit where, if it is to remain 2, it ought to say 2.0, just to be 100% clear that we mean 2 and no halves, or 2.5.
So that we don't reappear before ZBA with interpret this, was it 2.2 or 2 and something?
Well, yes, because the BZA, that part of their role is to come and suggest to us where our ordinances are unclear. We produce them, and we recommend them up to the township, and it's the BZA's job to interpret them. And if they have a problem interpreting, or if they think something's ambiguous, that's what the BZA is there for. They're there to be our proofreaders and tell us that we have more work to do cleaning up an ordinance. We've got to respect that, I think.
Mr. Chair, there is a public comment on this discussion point. Would you mind if I read it?
Please.
Okay. Mr. Stephen Dark said regarding the height ordinance, I am fully supportive of an increase in the allowable number of stories for residential zoning. I also believe there should be a consideration to raise the height limit beyond 30 feet based on research into ordinances of other lake communities such as Belleville, Ypsilanti, Novi, Walled Lake, and West Bloomfield, et cetera. So thank you, Mr. Dark, for that comment.
Okay. Do we need a motion to direct staff to move ahead, or have we given enough information that we can?
I think you've given us enough direction.
Okay.
Information, as I mentioned, there's a parallel request occurring where the particular applicant on Ormond Drive will be requesting a variance from the 2.0-story cap. So just to be aware that that's also forthcoming, but that's technically a separate discussion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that Ormond Drive, that's one of the parcels that we updated the ordinances. Lake parcel that is smaller than the 50 feet can have a separate setbacks. I think we did in 2019. We said it was a percentage setback. This is one of those parcels. So it is there are special circumstances involved, which is why I think it's
Correct.
probably legitimate for them to go and ask for the variance on the property. It's really narrow, was my read.
Yes,
Just so
we
you guys
adopted
know.
the ordinance where we said where there's a non-conforming lot width, the side yard setback shall be a percentage of the lot width based upon other communities I'd researched, yes.
Yeah.
So just a question, is this the lot on Ormond Drive where the house was completely torn down?
Believe that.
There was a cottage that was torn down, yeah.
It's vacant today, I think.
Yes.
Right. I didn't even know there was a house there because it was covered with trees.
Okay, do we have general discussion and updates? Director?
There will be a meeting on April 12th, I'm pretty confident. I'll just say that. I did see there were some other folks in the audience. I'll make sure that there's a opportunity. I would have offered kind of general comment at this point in the agenda. I'll make sure we kind of spell that out at the early part of the agenda in case people are here just to ask questions on the front end about general planning commission procedure. So I'll make sure we have that available for next meeting.
Do we have any other comments for the good of the order? Okay, I guess we can entertain a motion for adjournment. Do we have such?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Support. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Should have packed a sandwich.
We are adjourned.
All right, Jackson.
Should have brought a canteen.